Very good afternoon and welcome back. Very good afternoon. Thank you. Hope all of you had a good lunch and also had water too. In India, as you all know, whenever a guest arrives at home, he or she is first welcomed by offering water. If water is not offered by the family, it is considered disrespectful. That shows water is indispensable in our life, right from birth to death. Water is the lifeblood of human civilization and also has been the facilitator of nation building and regional cooperation. Even the motto of Indian Navy says, which was taken from the first mantra of Taittiriya Upanishad, Shanno Varunaha, may the God of oceans be auspicious unto us. For all its worth, however, water is not immune to diplomatic tensions. Water problems are complex because they cross physical, disciplinary and jurisdictional boundaries, and hence it is critically important to have a dialogue and collectively deal with it. There can be no development without addressing the question of water. So this water diplomacy is about dialogue, negotiation and reconciling conflicting interests among regions. So this panel will discuss on international cooperation over shared water resources and water diplomacy as an approach to conflict transformation, peace building and regional cooperation. Saying this, let me welcome the chair of this dialogue 2, Dialogue on Water Diplomacy, Challenges and Opportunities in Regional Cooperation, Dr. Shanthie Mariet D'Souza, Founder and President Mantraya, to chair this session, please. Can I also welcome Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, retired, who is the Director of National Maritime Foundation, to kindly come onto the stage, please. May I also welcome Dr. Adnan Altay Altinors, the Consul General of Turkey in Hyderabad. Thank you so much. Shanthie, can I request you to take over the panel?
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I think we have a very interesting session just after lunch, and it's been a good sumptuous lunch. So I guess water should keep everyone awake, and more so because water is the area of future conflict. It can be an area of cooperation, but depends on how you actually look at water. So I think I should congratulate ISP and the MEA for picking on water diplomacy, which is a much less studied subject and much less deliberated. And given the fact that water is such an important source of both conflict and cooperation, I think it's a timely initiative, and we do have extremely qualified and distinguished panelists. But before introducing them, I would like to dwell a little bit of what water diplomacy is. So when we're talking about water diplomacy, we want to focus on establishing novel solutions that are founded on a scientific basis and sensitive to societal constraints, to a wide range of problems associated with water sharing. And this is important given the fact that when we look at water, we're just not looking at transboundary issues. I mean, a whole range of issues have been mentioned, and it's been talked about even in your agenda. There are cross-cutting issues. For example, you do have population, demography, urbanization, pollution, climate change, environmental and financial implications. But beyond these cross-cutting issues, it's also the fact that how water shared between countries and between people dictates a lot of what is inclusive development. And that's very important for a country like India, where you see two Indias emerging, which is one is very urban, the other one which is very rural and agricultural based, which was covered in the previous panel. So we are looking at a multi-stakeholder dialogue here. And this is again very important because what does water diplomacy teach us? It teaches us the skill to transform a fixed quantity of water into a flexible and sustainably shared resource, shifting the discourse from water sharing and allocation to benefit from water resources, opening up new avenues and vistas for resolving water conflicts and cooperation. And this is very important, especially for India's neighborhood policy, given that we do have issues of sharing water. Some instances we have been successful, and some issues we do have problems. So the complex water problems require a negotiated solution, and therefore there is this need for this dialogue. So having said that, I would like to introduce to you the first panelist for the day, Vice Admiral Chauhan, who is the director of the National Maritime Foundation in Delhi. He actually needs no introduction, but to briefly state, he's had more than a 4-decade-long service career and has commanded several of India's frontline surface combatants, including INS Virat. He's, in addition to his distinguished service, he's also a prolific writer, and his latest book entitled India's Maritime Strategy is going to be published very soon, and we do look forward to reading that, sir.
Thank you.
He holds many positions, and most importantly are ones in College of Defense Management in Hyderabad itself, the National Defense College in New Delhi, and also has been advising the government at various important forums, and including the NSCS. So having very briefly introduced you, and in the interest of time, I request you to make a presentation in about 10 to 15 minutes. And thereafter, we'll have the second panelist for the day, and then we should open up the floor for the discussion so that we have more of a dialogue going. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You know, when I was invited here, I was given many injunctions that you are not to run a PPT, but I'm going to run a PPT. And what I thought I would do is, first of all, introduce you to some nuances that are not as well studied as they ought to be, relying largely upon Samuel Taylor Coleridge's somewhat misquoted couplet that there's water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. And also the fact that in the area of water diplomacy, as a naval officer, I wish to quite deliberately skew the discussions away from the standard 3 areas of the Ganga, Meghna, Brahmaputra basin problems and the Teesta river problems vis-a-vis Bangladesh, and of course the Indus Valley, the Indus water treaty problems or challenges with Pakistan. These are areas in which almost everybody has expertise, and we will be happy to take them on during the Q&A, but let me start. First of all, I wish to, at the cost of teaching grandmother to suck eggs, I want to say that almost all our universities across the country teach you that geopolitics, I'm afraid that the two of you are going to get cricks in your neck. Geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geostrategy are actually considered on the same horizontal level in a hierarchical taxonomy. This is rubbish. This is not how it is at all, and all our universities have it wrong. The truth is that geopolitics is a superset. Every country has some geoeconomic goals and some non-geoeconomic goals to be attained. Geoeconomic goals are obvious. Non-geoeconomic goals are functions of culture, functions of the pursuit of gross national happiness, people-to-people contact. And then every country has some geostrategies for the attainment of its geoeconomic goals and some for the attainment of non-geoeconomic goals. For example, China in 1950 decided that Formosa was not to represent the whole of China in the UN, but the People's Republic of China was to do so, and then they executed a strategy by which this would come to pass. In the process, of course, lots of African nations got a lot of Chinese aid. And of course, this whole process is either assisted by or hampered by the interpersonal relations between the respective leaderships. Prime Minister Modi, for example, has introduced a geopolitical mechanism called huggability. He hugs people, and that leads us to rather interesting developments. Below the level of geostrategy, below that lies some assurance mechanisms and insurance mechanisms, because you want something. How do you know your geostrategy will work? So you want something to assure you that it will work. And what if it doesn't work? If it all starts to fall apart, then you need some insurance mechanisms, and that's where militaries and naval bases and this whole business of Djibouti and Gwadar and all that jazz comes at that level. And it's therefore fundamentally, foundationally flawed in thinking if you were to say, do you know that China's BRI is not just a geo-economic construct, but it has a geostrategic? This is nonsense. China has an economic goal. The BRI is a geostrategy for attainment of that goal. In order to assure and ensure that BRI, the PLA and everything else comes in. The other point I wanted to emphasize is that there are security dimensions of climate change which get no traction in our country compared to the importance that they actually have for us. Let me show you some of them, and they all impact on water. As we have higher temperatures as a result of greenhouse gases, which I don't need to emphasize, all these factors come in. Now I presume that you can read really fast. After all, you are in the ISB. And so I'm going to show you a graph here which says that the global mean temperatures, notwithstanding whatever President Trump says or doesn't say, because actually global warming or global change or climate change doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. It's going to happen anyway. So if you look at that peak out there at 2016, we are seeing significant rise, and we are highly unlikely as a nation, as a country, as a region, or as a world to be actually able to meet a 2-degree max rise over pre-industrial levels in terms of temperature. So when you have heat, increases of heat, you have a series of effects, many of which have direct impacts on water, and I will talk to you about them after I finish showing you some of these more obvious ones. Okay, so what about India? 54% of India is already suffering from varying degrees of high to extremely high water stress. So this is not an academic discussion anymore. It's not just something that you can discuss in desultory terms over a cocktail in one of Delhi's 5-star hotels. It is something that is going to happen to you and me, more you than me, I think. And if you look at water stress by country, increasing water scarcity due to climate change will contribute to instability throughout the world. Populations will start moving, and migration will occur both within and across borders. And this, of course, is a classic case. The last time we had 1 million refugees coming in from Bangladesh, we had some dramatic outcome of that. So if we have something similar which happens on both sides, and if, for example, the situation exacerbated by climate change affects Bangladesh more intensely, and we start having another wave of refugees, first of all, where will they come? Highly unlikely that they will come to Hyderabad. They will all land up in the entire Red Corridor, which is already a place in which the government of India's writ does not run as strongly as Delhi would wish it to. Then there is a problem in areas where I think Dr. Shanthie has specialized in, which is Afghanistan, Pakistan, and that area which is already suffering from enormous stress. Okay, so in the developing world, even a relatively small climatic shift can trigger or exacerbate food shortages, water scarcity, destructive weather events, the spread of disease, and so on and so forth, all leading to migration. And now try and imagine a situation. You've got migrants coming in from the east, and you've got migrants coming in from the west. Delhi is not a place where you want to live, because that's where it's going to be impacting the most, the whole Indo-Gangetic plain, and that will lead you east and west across all the 3 areas that I told you already are the traditional ones for the Indus water treaty, the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna basin, as well as the Teesta, and the 440 kilometers, I think, of run that Teesta has through India. So in fact, this is a bit of a plug for me. I have already done a couple of studies for the UK Commonwealth indicating what are the chances of climate change causing state failure. And there is an interesting amount of discussion that could be held about this. What about this? What does this have to do with water shortage and water diplomacy? So I'm first going to highlight the problem very quickly. As you start having shortages of water, they cause disease. As you cause disease, you have potable water depletion. And as that happens, you start having increased vigorousness of the vectors of disease. So let's take a case of, I don't know what, let's take Zika. So when you have Zika and it's coming into your country, when you ask people, have you come from so-and-so country that has been afflicted by Zika? And you say, okay, health authorities will now screen you. Isn't that right? But what if that Zika virus is not Zika, but it is something that affects goods? The movement of trade, of merchandise trade. Now if you start to impose restrictions on the movement of merchandise goods, you are impacting a country's politico-economic base, as of course you have seen in the case of bananas, President Duterte and the People's Republic of China. Water scarcity also shapes the geopolitical order when states engage in direct competition with neighbors over shrinking water supplies. This of course is the Pakistan view of what happens to their segment of the Indus rivers and the flooding that was caused thereafter. What about outside of this? How regional is this regional? If you look at Turkey's 22 dams and 19 power plants along the Euphrates, this gives Turkey the capacity to cut Syria's water supply by 40% and Iraq's water supply by 80%. So Iraq, when it says, or Syria, when it says, I want, Turkey can decide whether you actually want or you don't want. Take Israel. Israel's geopolitics. Why did Israel need to conquer and capture the Golan Heights? Not because they gave them great views, but because the aquifers are there. And you want, this is a conflict on water. Well, it's not only a conflict on water, but water plays a very large part in determining how a country decides to engage in conflict along what axes, with what forces, and at what speed. And so Israel's requirement to actually capture the Golan Heights over there, this is not amenable to my pointer, but you can see the Sea of Galilee and the Golan Heights above that, and this is the reason why it was so important. What about terrorism? You know, in Syria, the 6-year war and the rise of ISIS is not really a function of climate change, but climate change impacted it. What happened was that for 4.5 years, there was a predicted, not unpredicted, not whoops, where did this come from kind of place, a predicted Mediterranean drought. And despite that, the political hierarchy of Syria was not able to actually factor this, and this drought led to huge demographic shift of rural populations towards Damascus. Damascus is not able to handle this. It tells its police, stop them. The police go there and they say, but they're from the same village. So they say, okay, then they tell the army, you stop them. And armies tend to have, less calibrated ways of stopping people. The next thing you know, there is a rise of ISIS. What about Boko Haram? Climate changes fuel and accelerate terrorism. They strengthen recruiting efforts, such as this group, allowing them to recruit more easily. Let me show you how this happens. This is Lake Chad. This is a timeline, a time map. You see that on top left? That's 1963. That's 2001. We are in 2018 now. Lake Chad is all but almost disappeared. No more drinking water. In the whole belt between Nigeria, Cameroon and Chad that Lake Chad actually feeds. Therefore, you have an increased ability of terrorist groups to simply recruit people. In terms of water, water is also capable of being weaponized, and the ISIS has had choked off water to loyalist towns. In 2015, ISIS closed the gates of the Ramadi Dam to more easily attack regime forces down. What about locally? Can we come back to something around the SARC area which we know something about? Okay, Bangladesh. As a function of sea level rise caused by climate change in our own lifetimes, including all the people like me who are long in the tooth here, Bangladesh will lose between 26 and 46% of its coastal land. Then several problems will arise in terms of A, migration, but B, this is salinization of fresh water along entire tracts of the coast. As the seawater rises, the salinization increases. The freshwater aquifers and freshwater groundwater that you had, they simply go poi, and now you really have a serious situation on your hands. The problem is that this whole area is not yet being studied with the degree of intensity that it should, which would allow us to make not only national level security plans or regional level mitigation plans, but business plans. Should we invest? Should we not invest? Over what time frame should we invest? Therefore, which industries should we choose? And so on and so forth. And this applies all across Southeast Asia as well. This is the salinity modeling for Vietnam. And as you can see, for a 50 centimeter sea level rise or a 100 centimeter one, the picture is frightening. These climate changes, and uncertainties, not uncertainties, these are certainties, there are 5 certainties, amplify and exist, and they amplify and exacerbate in existing stresses. Thank you. On weaker nations, because weaker nations are problematic. If you're a rich nation, if you're wealthy, if you've got actual reserves of resilience by way of wealth, by way of education, by way of contingency planning, by way of bandwidth, then you can solve this. But all these crises for developing countries are interwoven and self-perpetuating. Water shortages lead to food shortages, that leads to conflict, that leads to conflict over remaining resources, then that becomes shorter and you enter into a vicious cycle. So once underway, this chain reaction becomes increasingly difficult to stop, and therefore it is critical that this issue be given the degree of attention which I'm delighted to see is being done here at the ISB. So what risk mitigation factors do we have at a region? One is that if you want to do something about water, by and large you need more energy. You need energy, and energy is best handled at sea with seawater, because this business of doing desalination is just too expensive for the developing world. We just don't make, nobody makes the membranes on the basis of which you do your reverse osmosis. So then you need to do something like this. This is OTEC, Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion. This, I'm sure, is a high school diagram which everybody is pretty much familiar with. What I want to tell you is that we already have 3 of the islands of the Lakshadweep generating 100,000 liters of fresh water per day with no investment of additional primary energy. It's just making use of the thermal coefficient of the water. The second, so why aren't we able to propagate this? Isn't this better than solar energy alone? Because you're going to get fresh water out of it, and that's the whole point. The second is, if you don't want to do that, try gas hydrates. Gas hydrates, I'm not going to go into this slide, but I want to show you the gas hydrates, crystalline methane trapped, is available all along our coast, and in the Krishna Godavari basin, accumulations there are amongst the richest in the world, and production of 10%. If we can capture 10%, we will solve India's energy requirements for 100 years. It's worth doing. Of course, there are other mechanisms for wave energy, for tidal energy. We've got all this. I'm not going to go into this. What I want to stop at is 2 slides, 2 points. One is on the slide, and one I'm going to tell you. I have had it up to here. I live in Delhi. You know, in Delhi we have a saying, you know, smoking is for children. Real men come to Delhi. But in truth, I've had it up to here with people lamenting all the time. We are national lamenters. We are actually international lamenters. We are, you know, kuch nahi hoga, ye government nahi chalne wali. No matter what actually happens. So we keep hearing complaints that we don't have a regional security construct where security is not military security. Security is holistic security, freedom from threats that arise either in the sea, through the sea, or from the sea. And we do have, at the very top, we have Sagar. It's the Prime Minister's vision. No implementation of vision. Vision translates into derision and becomes derided as rhetoric. But Sagar is security and growth for all in the region. It's a conceptual level. Every security construct needs 3 levels, a conceptual one, a political one, and then the executive one. The executive one gets the least traction from India, because it's so much nicer to talk in the air, you know, intergalactic speech. Actually doing something about it, meh? And that is how it works. At the conceptual level, Sagar. At the political level, Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA. At the actual doing of the doing, who will do the doing? That is a collection of maritime forces called the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. This exists. Creating a new structure doesn't help. In this Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, 38 out of 38 countries of the Indian Ocean Rim and its littoral and its innards, their maritime forces are represented either as observers or as members. What more do we want to make it happen? Now only is a matter of saying that whose baby was this? Was this sufficiently accepted as being a pan-India baby, or is this Jon Snow from Game of Thrones? Which one is it? And the answer, therefore, will tell us that if we use these cleverly, sensibly, we can actually stitch the region together in discussing those issues that are not military. Water is ubiquitous. The lack of water will kill us all. And there is no way that we are going to continue with the present method of trying for supply side improvements. We just have to now try and work out either demand side restrictions or create new supply side options. And this business of OTEC, gas hydrates, this is the answer which should be applying across the region. We should be going to Maldives and saying, you had that terrible fire, remember? We had to give you 80 tons of water per day, remember? 80,000 tons, not 80 tons. And therefore, let's instead give you 15 OTEC plants, because you have that structure. That's about the second hint ISB has given, so I'll stop at that. I'll just tell you one last point. And that is, we can be accused of many things, gentlemen. You can be, ladies, you can be accused of the fact that, you know, our ships, they don't always, they have accidents. Ya kya kare? The submarines sink, the big aircraft fall out of the sky. You are forgiven for all those. There's only one factor that history will not forgive you for. Will not forgive you, will not forgive us, and that is if we experience and exhibit failures of imagination. This is the only one I would strongly caution that we don't fall into. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you for an excellent presentation. I think it's really set the stage and the tone, and good food for thought. After having a good meal, I think we'll have a good discussion. And I wouldn't like to get into the questions right now, but would like to introduce the second speaker for the day, that is Mr. Altinors, who is the Consulate General of the Republic of Turkey in Hyderabad. He's had a distinguished foreign service of 20 years. He's been a Consul General here from 15 January this year. His prior positions included Consular in the Permanent Mission of the Turkey to the United Nations, and he's also worked at the European Union. But most importantly, he's also been the head of the Environment Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ankara between 2014 and 15. He's had various academic stints abroad, and you can read the CV. But what I'd like to do is request you to share your views in the next 10 minutes, please, on water sharing. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Ministry of External Affairs and the Indian School of Business for organizing this dialogue and inviting me as a speaker in this water session, which is very important. I'm really pleased to address such a distinguished audience. I have been in diplomacy for more than 20 years, and most of my time was occupied with dealing with water issues, climate change, negotiations. So I will try to give you some insight from my and Turkish perspective. Water is life. Water is in every part of our daily life. Water is a cross-cutting issue. Water affects many sectors and being affected by many sectors. Water is consumed by domestic use, industrial use, and mostly agriculture. 70% of water resources on average are consumed by the agricultural sector. That means more production of agricultural products, more livelihood for people, more jobs, agro-industries, rural development. So it is really critical for rural life, but not only for rural life, also for urban life, for industry. Water is everywhere, and also environment. Water, if the water in our environment is polluted, then we have a very big problem, and we need to solve it. We observed the presentation of the Admiral. There are some really pessimistic scenarios. So far there have been some negative developments. The climate change is changing the spatial and temporal availability of water resources. Then this global warming is compelling us to manage water resources in a much better way. First of all, I should like to mention that we have all the technology for the moment, all the knowledge, all the expertise to manage the water resources in an appropriate manner. We need to do more investments, and we need to first select the right people to work on these problems and solve these problems. And this needs political will. The governments at all levels, national, state, local, they need to establish good teams first to identify problems, develop appropriate solutions, and implement them. Implementation is the most costly stage, but if we find good solutions, then in time, with good investments, with appropriate financing, we can address water problems. When it comes to transboundary issues, there has been a general perception that water is a source of conflict. There might be water wars in the near future, and climate change and other factors are increasing this risk. But the developments so far and the prospects show that this is not the case. Actually, most of the countries, most people consider water as a source of cooperation. Every country, every state, or every sector are looking for win-win solutions by sharing the benefits of water and working or thinking about how we can best manage our water resources. So I think we are much going beyond the conflict side of the water to the cooperation of the side of the water. There are certain basins which are of prominent importance. One of them is Euphrates and Tigris River Basin between Turkey, Syria and Iraq, between Pakistan and India, the Indus River, Nile Basin in Africa. And there are several river basins in Europe where the situation are totally different. There are abundant water over there, but the ones I mentioned first, they face more water scarcity. What I try to explain, every river basin has its own dynamics, own characteristics, and own peculiarities. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution to any river basin or any water issue. So all the dynamics in the basin should be considered and addressed through understanding first, sharing information, negotiation, discussion. This should be open and frank. If there are some other interests, concerns, agendas, then especially in water, there is no solution. I can easily tell this because I have been experiencing this kind of negotiations for 20 years, and making progress is very, very difficult if the understanding is not there. Common understanding is not there. And this common understanding can be first established by the political will. There should be a political will, then the solutions are technical. The solutions should be in the context of the integrated water management or integrated river basin management. And we have all the opportunities, technologies, expertise for that. In the international law, there are certain principles which we have consensus. What are they? First, equitable and reasonable utilization or allocation of transboundary water resources. Equitable means not equal. We would share water according to our needs and maximum benefits. There should be a compromise, there should be an optimization, and there should be a just allocation. Second principle, no significant harm to riparian states. Our projects, our plans, our actions should not give any significant harm to other riparian states in the transboundary river basin. There is no definition of significant harm, but when it comes to the interpretation, then we understand it very well as we look at the issue from the technical perspective. Sharing data, information, it is very important. If you hide any data about water consumption targets, national plans, anything, then you can not reach any solution, any compromise. Then developing joint initiatives, joint projects, they have first understanding each other, and then they have also enhancing cooperation. When you are turning the wheel, then it accelerates unexpectedly, so it will be easier to reach a solution. And technology. Many technological solutions, know-how, they are being disregarded in negotiations. Actually, the solution is in technology. We can reduce the water consumption in agriculture, in any sector, by using the recent technologies. We can also use some new simulation computer techniques to make predictions, forecasts, so we can understand the future trends of water resources and also some pollution situations. So we can do a lot. First, with the political will, by understanding each other, seeking technical solutions, and leaving behind our prejudices. So I think it's enough for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Altinors. I think you set the tone again by talking about a very important component that water necessarily does not need to wars. There have been instances of cooperation and the emphasis on technology. And I hope this will generate some interesting questions. But having said that, I also like to summarize the key points which have come from the discussion. One is, I think, Admiral Chauhan's point on risk mitigation. And I think this needs further discussion. And the entire fact that, you know, there is something called OTEC, which has not been used. There are no business plans in place. There's no vision of how to use the existing technology for the benefit of many. So I think if we could focus our discussion on looking at the risk mitigation and also on cooperation and conflict, and looking at issues which directly impacts lives of people on the ground, that will be a useful dialogue. In addition to looking at the larger strategic questions of water sharing. So I would like to open the floor for discussion. I would request you to keep your questions brief. Kindly identify yourself and yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the very outset, thanks for the MEA and jointly with on ISB Dean, faculty, respected Dr. Raj sir and his entire team for giving me an opportunity to be in the midst of them. Thank you very much. At the very and also my question to the one Ashok Chauhan sir, Admiral, Sri Pradeep Chauhan sir, sorry, is the one which goes like this. Now, thank God, by the blessings of God, I am having the pure drinking water today, and also the one time of a quality food over here. I'm taking to the South African nation, sir. The toddlers and extreme, the persons are not getting proper drinking water and as well as quality food. And except in some parts of the Nigerian and also the one South African nations. And what we are going to talk about is on the water diplomacy. Is a short, they're coming up, I don't know, the God knows what is goes to be the short we are facing here short. The stress of the water management, yes, of course. We are also been facing the water here. The wastage of the water from the, not only from our people, but mainly from the local civic body people, particularly made mention to you, sir. And this one, this is my personal submission to you. Thank you very much.
Would you like to respond?
Would you like to take a few questions together?
Okay. I'll take 4 questions and then we'll have the panel of, I'll open the panel for discussion, but please also let me know whom you want to address the question to. Yes, please.
Hello. Yeah, hello. Hi. Hello, Dr. Karthik here. Sir, in the recent past, there was a news in the press media. There were 2 NGOs who are working hard for this issue to be solved by growing number of trees across the man. There was a big thing, news in mass media. I remember there were 2 NGOs. Why not they all join hands along with the Ministry and Government of India and work as a force? India working in different small areas and pockets. Number 1. Number 2, this part Kaveri has become not only an issue of liquid and water. Politics, elections have also been fought on these issues. What is your view on that, sir? Take on that. Thank you.
Whom is this addressed to? Me?
Whom is this addressed to?
Anybody.
Anybody, okay, fine. Can you keep the mic here, please? Thank you. Got me on board.
Hello, this is Narendra. So first, to add on to Pradeep sir, regarding Kaveri, the states, in between the states, there is a kind of a war situation, and the national interests are not taken care, and political and states policies and even national parties also playing the mischief of state politics. And I wanted the other speaker, in the different countries, in between the states, do you see any rivalry of sharing the waters which we see in India? Or what is the solution? I just wanted the panel to throw upon the light to overcome this.
Yeah, I have a question on VOTEC, this here. See, last year, we had a severe water, shortage in Karnataka and then Maharashtra also. Almost in Karnataka, 100 villages suffered, and thanks to Infosys Foundation, which was supplying water tanks, 100 water tanks daily. Now my question is, when we have identified a technique like VOTEC, why governments are not willing to make use of it, or the people who knows about it, why they are not forcing the governments? On the one hand, we are seeing the people suffering.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would
you like to address Admiral Chauhan, please?
Well, I think I have a preponderance of the question, so let me start. I'm sorry, I don't remember everybody's name, so please forgive my lack of manners. In terms of pure drinking water, and thank God we have some of it, and we're not as bad as South Africa at the moment, and you must have seen magazines which now indicate that this is likely to happen further. I think that the answer to avoiding those situations lies intra-India. Many questions are intra-India, and I leave the regional questions to my co-panelist. First, of course, we need, the first thing you need to do is do some scholarship. Some serious scholarship is required. You can't do things just off the, top of your head, because they generally are things that are good in coffee sessions or chit-chats or dinner parties. This is not scholarship. First, you need to do some quantification of the available water in our country and in South Asia. Then, before you can make an allocation of water, you must know how much water there is. So that in and of itself is a huge and important step that needs to be taken. Second, whatever water you have, we must be able to at least use that. That means water pollution must stop. And this business of this desultory, sort of addressal of these through some political machinations is not going to lead us anywhere. We must just stop this business of water pollution so that whatever limited water you have can at least be optimized. Third, as was indicated, the increased use of end-use efficiency in agriculture again needs to be carefully figured out. There is a siloization, somebody already raised that as the question itself. There is a siloization not only in terms of governments and NGOs, etc., but inside private enterprises, private educational institutions here. If we are not going to look at macro issues in the form of management solutions to those macro issues, then we will have failed to live up to the potential that exists in institutions which are first tier, such as the ISB. And like that, in Delhi, there's no use having 100 think tanks. If all they must think, otherwise the country will tank. The next point is that the assessment of climate change has to be factored in with a great amount of scholarship, great amount, and we must be able to generate large amounts of effervescence in studies from all this, from institutions of excellence, not only ISB, but institutions, certainly not excluding ISB either. That's really what I want to say in response to your very good points. The second point here was in respect to the media and some NGOs working very hard, sir, and why isn't the government doing anything? Why aren't we able to holistically combine our respective efforts? Even for this holistic combination, you have actually hit upon a crucial element. The belief that only Delhi knows or only government knows is, if it was so, we would not be in the state that we are in. The fact that we are in the state we are in means that Delhi knows a lot, but it doesn't know everything. And therefore, there is a huge requirement to increase the number of stakeholders with whom we are interfacing and interacting. And those stakeholders are not limited to one or another type of person. They could be NGOs, they could be two-man NGOs, they could be people who are solving the, enhancing the amount of water by, as you said, reforestation, by re-greening. And all these are, so now we know the solution. Now who is going to bell that particular cat? How is it going to happen? And if we think that the Pope is going to come or Bhagwan Sri Ram is going to come and sort it out, that is unlikely to happen. Therefore, it has to be a situation that lends itself to all of the above. That means the top must start. The MEA must commission some studies. The think tanks must produce quality work. The academic institutions must be parallelly tasked. NGOs must be counted as to those NGOs which are actually producing work, and those as opposed to a few of them, unfortunately, which are just milking the government cow.
Admiral?
Just one more point. The Cauvery Basin issue, it is certainly an emotive issue, it is certainly politics. Whether it is regional, international, or it is national, sir, politics are part and parcel of the way we interact with each other. Societal structures are what politics are. And similarly, there was a question on, I can't remember from where, that side I think, saying that states themselves are at conflict, and what should we do, and if Karnataka had the kind of problems, why couldn't OTEC solutions be found? Okay, so OTEC once again is an area that needs some scholarship, because OTEC can't be applied across the board. It needs some environmental conditions. It needs 20 degrees of water differential between the top and the bottom. You need 6,000 meters. But suppose you can find them in all of Lakshadweep, you can find them in the Maldives, you can find them in Port Blair, then the available amount of water will increase, because the total amount of water is finite. And therefore, these solutions may not solve Karnataka's problem directly, but it will certainly solve it in an off-cushion cannon fashion. That means you increase the available water. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Admiral. Would you like to contribute just a minute, please, because we are running short of time?
Shortly, countries have different administrative structures, and their water management structures would be the same or different, independent or dependent. But the critical issue is to manage water resources at the river basin level.
Correct.
That means removal of borders between countries, between states, between provinces. So if you approach water as an integrated resource, then you can find solutions. But it is a very important decision. It is a political decision, and that there should be a political will to solve all these problems, allocate water, address pollution, etc. I think 1 minute is okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shanthie, Admiral Chauhan, and CG Dr. Altinors.
Okay, I don't get to say thank you, but I think it's very interesting that post-lunch we had such an invigorated discussion, so we should thank the panelists for that. And also, it shows that ISP has chosen a very important topic, and you can have a full-day conference on this.
Definitely, thank you for your insightful discussions, and definitely water diplomacy will be a success if we start viewing water sharing as a need-based approach rather than a rights-based approach. So with that positive note, I request DNV Kumaraguru, Director External Relations, to come onto the stage to give mementos to the panelists with Dr. Shanthie. Admiral Chauhan, and CG of Turkey